Okay guys, so today I'm doing something slightly different. I've talked a lot about Centurion in White Forest, but now I'm going to show a pure Centurion build. And I want to talk about going from pre-info meta to post-info meta and the implications that that has for a pure Centurion deck. Also, if you want more scuffed videos, because I'm actually using my laundry rack to hold the camera because I don't have any other setup and my mat is on a chair, then subscribe for more content. Also, there is a Discord link that is in the channel description, and I'll put it in the episode description, where mostly people are talking about deck building, and usually the focus is on White Forest, but I'll also be covering other stuff. Okay, so first of all, the most important thing to take into consideration when you are playing a deck is, what does your non-engine look like? Can you actually survive if you lose the dice roll, or even if you win the dice roll? So the most important thing about this deck is that we are playing 15 hand traps, which is the bare minimum. Now, ideally, you draw the QCR Veiler and not the other two. So 3 Veiler, 3 Ash, 3 Imperm. Same situation here. Ideally, you draw the QCR and 3 Mourner. So 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12. And for my ratios, initially I wanted to play 15 because that's the bare minimum. But instead, I settled for Fenrir's. And the idea behind these was, if you're playing the Horus version of this deck is quite costly when you go through your combos, because you have to discard for stand-up and you have to discard for Imseti, and you don't know if it's going to resolve. You have to discard for King Sarcophagus. And so anything that gives you even just like some additional card in your hand is somewhat useful. I did briefly consider playing the Kashtira type package that has become popular in Kashtira Snake Eyes, which is a Wraithoth, a Fenrir, a Unicorn, and a Birth. And I thought that that might have been better in some cases, but the problem with this deck is that there's so many bricks in a pure Centurion deck that you can't afford to play suboptimal cards like Birth, because the number of brick cards that you play in your deck is just like way too high after a certain point for you to be able to play the game, basically. So that is the non-engine count. Let's move those onto somewhere that's not my laundry rack. Actually, let me just stick those up here. Okay, now let's move on to the engine. So I'm playing 3 Trudea and 1 Bonfire. I've seen some lists play 3 Bonfire. This is not correct. One of the issues with this deck is that these cards are not good cards. So obviously, if you play this in a vacuum or you put your opponent to sleep and then you play, these are 1-card combo. But in real life, these are not 1-card combo. These are cards that get hit by Imperm or Veiler or Ash on Primera. And then you need to have an extender to play. And one of the biggest problems with these decks is that in terms of extenders, Oath is the best card in your entire deck because it is both a starter and an extender. I've gone over this in previous videos, but this has basically no downside. The only condition is, if you choose the effect where you place a Centurion monster from your deck in your spell and trap zone as a face-up continuous trap, then for the rest of the turn while you control that card or any card with the same original name, you cannot special summon from the extra deck except Centurion monsters. But that's not really a restriction, because you can just make the Centurion monster and then you can make whatever else you want after that. Also, you should remember that this card, the secondary effect, to set a Centurion spell or trap directly from your deck, that includes stand-up. I think a lot of people forget this, but this is a Centurion spell or trap. So the fact that you can access your field spell also through Oath if you want to is great. So these are the actual good cards because they can both be starters and extenders. These are really just like, you don't want to draw multiples of them because you can only normal summon once. So like drawing a Trudea and a Primera doesn't help you, and that's why I'm not playing more than 1 Bonfire. So this is just because I at least want one of these in my hand every single game, and then I want at least one of these in my hand every single game. So that's ideal. Now, one of the problems, again, with this deck is that this deck is not good. So there aren't enough high quality cards, so Oath and Stand Up, for you to guaranteed have access to some kind of extender. So when you summon your Primera or your Trudea and you get Veilered or whatever, you have to have a way to continue playing. And Prosperity is probably the best card that exists that Centurion can play to do that. So even though I'm not on breakers on this build, I still play Prosperity. You have to banish 6 again because this deck is not good. This is major Copium, and usually you will see one extender type card, like one of these cards, after you banish 6. Then we're also playing the smallest Horus package possible. Now, usually when people talk about the Horus cards, they play like multiple Sarcophagus, or they play like other cards as well. And the thing is, this card is not a good card. This is a minus card. This card and the field spell are minus cards. You have to get rid of a card for the card to be useful. Whereas Imseti at least replaces itself. So while it is susceptible to Ash, at least you can check for Ash if you were going to do something else that could be ashed. It's like, at least it has that value. But you can't check for Veiler or Imperm with this card, which is unfortunate. So, like, if you're playing a good deck like Snake Eyes, there are lots of ways to check for those hand traps. Like, if you start with Black Witch and they have Veiler Imperm, they're going to Veiler Imperm the Black Witch. And then you know that now that they've gone through that, then it's easier for you to summon your Snake Eye Ash, and they will, there's less likelihood that they'll have that same interaction for it. But this deck doesn't have as many good ways to check for hand traps. Like, this places into the spell and trap zone, so it's not really checking. This also places, so it's kind of awkward. There's not like a good way to efficiently check for that type of stuff before going through with your engine. But I think that the deck is poor enough that you do need another sub engine, even though this is like not super great. So yeah, I don't play another King Sark because it's just not good in card economy. So those are the engines of the deck, and now you're probably wondering like, oh, where's the other Horus card or whatever. So these I have put in the last section. These are the cards that are bad. You don't want to draw any of these cards. So Happy is here because you basically, you kind of have to play another Horus monster, but because there are so many bad draws in this deck, I'm almost even considering not playing the Happy and just playing the Imseti and the Sark just to get a level 8 on field. And the level 8 is super relevant because it's what helps you synchro summon. Now, the problem with this deck pre-info, and this is why, like, this is the context that's useful for talking about the deck before we get to what does info mean for the deck, the new tuner monster, and then the quick play spell card, is that the primary limitation, aside from the issues with there not being enough high-quality cards, is not that there's only one tuner, because there would have been ways to play around it if they allowed you to summon this card, special summon this card more than once per turn. But if you read it, it says, you can only use each of the following effects once per turn. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add a Centurion card from your deck to your hand, except itself. Also, you cannot summon Centurion Primera for the rest of this turn. So this isn't just a hard once per turn. This is a hard once per turn with a lock on bringing it back again. I do not know why they did this, but it makes it impossible to go through your resources with another tuner. And so the tuner from info is mandatory despite being a garbage card because it is a different tuner, which means that you can synchro summon more than once per turn. All right, now going into the extra deck. So we have Legatia, Auxilia, Crimson Dragon, Blazar. This is the Crimson Dragon package. Well, the primary targets of the Crimson Dragon package here. So you have the Cosmic Blazar and the Calamities. You basically have to play Little Knight and everything that you can play it. Because we are playing the Horus cards, we are also playing Dingirsu and we are playing Photon Lord. So normally you make this first if you can make the Horus cards to insulate your plays because your deck is not good and is not resilient to interruptions. You basically have to play Zombie Vampire because a lot of hands you may not even draw playable, or if you draw playable but you have to extend, it's not good enough to just pass on a Trudea that was impermed and then a Photon Lord. You might as well just scoop up and go home. So you summon Zombie Vampire and you hope that you hit another piece of engine to special summon and continue playing. Then I have split these last 6 like this because these are usually what I banish off of Prosperity. So I kind of wanted to play Super Poly, but not playing Super Poly, I found that I had a decent amount of extra deck space. So I put in Typhon and Buzz King. So Buzz King seemed kind of solid if you were going to go into time or in strange scenarios where you needed a particular type of spot removal. Red Supernova Dragon is kind of special. Blazar and Calamity don't hit the same things. So I feel like you don't have coverage if you don't play this card. Then a second Legatia. So I opted to play a second Legatia over a second Auxilla because usually if you make Auxilla, you've already set your resource game up and you don't need to make another one. And I wasn't maining Shifter, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So if I was maining Shifter, I would feel like I probably should play another Auxilla because then that would give me access to my banished cards, whereas Legatia can only bring them back from the graveyard. Masurao is another flex spot. This card is kind of interesting because in my testing at locals with this deck, I found that sometimes we would be in a grind and I would have like no cards in hand and be trying to top deck in a deck that doesn't have a lot of high quality cards. And so this is kind of gimmicky. So this says, if your opponent activates a spell / trap card or effect, once per turn, if your opponent activates a spell / trap card or effect, except during the damage step, you can draw until you have 3 cards in your hand. So sometimes, like, you know, there are people that were making like a Baguska in my locals, but this attacks from defense position. So you could clear stuff like that. And then, you know, you could, especially if you're on power spell, it's easier to resolve this. If you're on hand traps and you use all your hand traps, then you usually can draw until you have 3 in your hand. So this is not like the best card in the world, but it does come up in those scenarios. And so if you have flex spots in your extra deck, this is something you could consider playing. And then Packbit, I thought that I needed something for Yubel, and I also wanted to play some Synchro 8s, so I put this into the deck, and it, you know, has some synergy with your deck. Okay, now more importantly, let's talk about the side deck. Now, side decks at locals are generally very specific to your locals. So you don't understand the setup, guys, that I'm dealing with here. Now, this card is garbage because when a spell / trap card or monster effect is activated, you have to send a monster card from your spell and trap zone to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card, and it's once per turn. I don't know why you have to send it. It should just have been, if you have one there, then you can do it, like the Wake Up card, which is also garbage. So this is just like seriously destroying your resource game, which is what Centurion is supposed to do. I don't know why they made the card like this, but it's searchable. So even though Judgment is better, I still play this because you can search it. Then I play Deck Lockdown. So this card is kind of interesting. So this says, neither player can add cards from their deck to their hand except by drawing them, okay? So you can't, like, Prosperity or whatever, like, type of stuff. You can't add cards off of search effects or whatever. You can't special summon monsters from the main deck, and then it's destroyed during the second standby phase after activation. So what's cool about this, obviously, you make your combo first, then you activate this card, and Legatia draws, and this doesn't stop you from drawing. So as you go through the grind, even if this card is still face up and it's not cleared or whatever, you can still get your draw under Legatia and like cycle through resources that way. Okay, so those are basically the going first cards, because I didn't want to take out too many hand traps, so I would just take out the hand traps at the worst in the matchup and put those in. Then, because there's a lot of random stuff, I wanted some generic removal that would be hard to stop after the Baron and Savage ban. So there's the Lightning Storm and the Evenly Matched. And with Prosperity, I like these types of cards because there's a better chance that you can see them and resolve them without committing something to your field. Then there were a bunch of Tenpai players, I realized, and so I wanted to have Ogre for at least the field spell. Now, the most important card, and probably the only reason that you should even consider playing this deck, is Dimension Shifter. So as cringe as this deck is bad, and when you're playing a bad deck, you have to play a broken card that doesn't hurt your deck as much as it hurts other decks. The only reason that I didn't main this is because I was playing the Horus package because I believed that the deck was struggling too much without additional gas, and this conflicts majorly with the Horus package. I could have tried like a different type of game plan where I took out the Horus package and I played a much larger Kashtira engine, because I think just adding in more hand traps in a deck that isn't able to play through many hand traps itself is a recipe for losing hand trap wars. But the siding pattern for this isn't too bad, because if you take out the Horus engine, then you only need a couple more cards to put in after D-Shifter. And the idea was, if I was playing against, like a fire deck or Ubel or something, that this would hurt them more than me, and the Auxilla would still be able to bring my cards back from banished. But I think, like, if you're going to play a deck like this, you should just main the Shifter, and you should build your deck around the Shifter. And, this is not a good strategy, and this is not good advice at actual high-level competitive play, but you should just hope to draw this card. So what changes after info is that you have more than one tuner, and that means that you can potentially, wait, these are my hand traps. That means that you can potentially make Blazar like on your own turn, because you weren't reliant on just a single synchro summon, but you can go into a second synchro monster, and then you could maybe Calamities lock in your opponent's turn under the protection of Blazar. Now, should you play this deck after info? If you already own the cards, then maybe you want to play the deck because you are coping and you don't want to buy new cards. But I think that if you're playing any version of Centurion, the White Forest version is just going to be better, because you have a lot more ways to apply gas and you still have space for hand traps. So that is my locals build of pure Centurion with Shifter in the side and the Horus cards.